Hello, arty peoples, and welcome to another episode of Jerry's Live. My name is Emmy Klein, and I'm your host this evening. And welcome to a really fun show. I'm very excited to share all of the things about making oil paint. That is what the show today is all about, is making your own oil paint. Now, just for those of you who are joining, though, this is going to be a very informational, heavy at the beginning. So I am going to be doing a lot of talking, and I'm sorry, but there's a lot of really good information that I need to get to you before I actually open these jars of pigments and things like that. Because I want to explain the process a little bit before I have to put on a mask, because safety is going to be a lot of this episode as well. So please pay attention to those things. Don't skip ahead, because this is really important stuff. So if you are interested in making your own oil paint and using any of the materials that I'm showing you today, make sure you go to the website JerrysArtarama.com and type in today's class code, which is JL292. So JL292 in the search bar. That should bring up the teacher's cart and show you everything that I'm going to be using throughout the show. So let's jump in, because we got a lot to cover. So let's go over basic materials real quick. Because just a lot of things are on my desk here. So the first and foremost thing that you're really going to need are your pigments and your oil, because that is essentially all you need to make an oil paint. Pigments come in a variety of different brands, and it also, you can get it a little bit more coarse ground if you find it a little bit kind of grittier. So if you do end up getting a pigment that is a little too gritty for you, you can actually mull it down in a mortar and pestle and kind of get it a little bit finer. The pigments I'm using today, I don't have to do that, so I'm not going to be doing that part of the process. But the pigments I happen to grab apparently match my hair. I've been doing this a lot lately, is like every time I do art or thing, it just tends to match my hair. It's not intentional.
Purple period.
Yes, this is blue purple period. So I happen to have the couple of different pigments that I have. This one was just more like my roots. So I have a light turquoise from Sennelier. There is actually the manganese violet from Gamblin. And then I have, well, I'll show you this one last. This one is the coral orange from Old Holland. Now this one I'm not going to be opening, because it is incredibly strong. Incredibly strong. Are you okay? There's laughter in the back. You guys are making me worry. Okay. Okay. Just checking. And then the last one, which I'm really excited about this one, is actually an iridescent from Sennelier. So if you ever wanted to have oil paints that were sparkly, you can make your own sparkly oil paints, and I'm very excited about that. Now, I have a couple of different examples of paint that I have made with all of these pigments, and I can show you them, because I'm not going to be able to make all of this today. But that is all the pigments that I have just on here. There's a lot of different colors and things out there. I specifically chose these because they are not super toxic, because that's going to be an issue of things that you need to pay attention to when you're handling raw pigments. But before we get into that, I did want to also touch base on the oil. I happen to have two different types of oils here. This is a linseed oil, which is a nice base standard oil that you find in a lot of oil paints. The reason why is because of all of the drying oils, this one dries the fastest. It can yellow over time. So if you do notice, like, the bottle is a little bit more yellow, like, it's just because it's so concentrated and like a lot in one spot. But if you put this in your window, it'll actually lighten up, which is beautiful. Sun bleaching is what they call it. And then I also have a walnut oil. There are different types of drying oils out there. That's the key word, though, drying oil. You have to have a drying oil. Do not mix your pigments with an olive oil, because olive oils don't dry, they don't cure, they're not going to be archival over time. So you want to make sure you get an artist grade drying oil. So I'm going to be probably using just the linseed oil, just because it's easy for me. Then I have a couple of different tools. This right here, these two things are really important. Yes, this is a huge, heavy piece of glass. Let me put that back on the table. So that right there is a grinding plate. So there is one side that is really super smooth, and then the top is kind of gritty. It's got a texture to it. You can kind of hear it. It's almost like frosted glass on the top. Yes. Now, when we first opened this up, it was really, really gritty, and that's going to kind of wear down over time. It's just going to be almost like a grinding stone like you would with a mortar and pestle. You need something that has that like kind of texture to it so you can actually really incorporate the oil with the pigment, and that's going to be really important. Now, to do that, you need one of these. This is a glass muller. So this is actually what you use to grind everything together. Then I have a couple of different things here, just like palette knives that I'm going to be using, and I usually have 2 on hand, and then a couple of measuring spoons. Now, we don't sell measuring spoons, you can just get them wherever, but I do recommend getting metal ones, just because you're not going to have any issues if you have to, I guess, kind of clean it off with solvents and things like that. And then we have a couple different silicone kind of shaper tools, and I will explain what this is for when we start grinding everything. And then I have a pipette as well. This is actually something that I added last minute because I realized how easy it was to use these instead of me using a measuring spoon every now and then. But we'll get into that. So pigments, I'm not going to open this right now because I wanted to touch base on safety. When it comes to pigments, and I actually had a conversation with a master chemist just to make sure that I was, getting my information correct. Pigments, you have a variety of pigments that are available for you to purchase. Some of them are not toxic. Some of them are very toxic. So when it comes to any of the pigments, usually you can see a little tech notes on our website for every pigment listed, and it should tell you whether or not it's toxic. It's usually going to have like an AP certified symbol if it's non-toxic. It'll have a CL on it if it is toxic. Now, no matter which one you get, you are going to need to have some kind of a mask protection. If it's not a toxic pigment, the master chemist I was talking to said an N95 mask should be good, as long as you have it on while this is open and in pigment like powder form. As soon as I incorporate this into the oils, I can take my mask off. And I don't know how the audio is going to be when I have this on, so I'm going to try and do that as quickly as possible. The other thing is when you're handling pigments, you don't fluff them, don't shake the jar, don't try and get it, because it's going to want to kind of disperse into the air. That's the thing we want to not do. So when you're measuring it, be very careful. Don't just scoop it wildly. You want to do it nice and slow. Keep the dust to a minimum, and then get it incorporated with your binder as quickly as possible. So I'm actually going to be using the manganese violet today. It's a weird thing with the pigments that I've been using here. This is actually, the only way I can describe it is like it's more wet feeling, because like the coral orange was definitely more of a dry pigment, whereas this has like almost like a wet feel to it. It's really bizarre. It's hard to explain until you actually physically like get your hands on it. But no matter what, you definitely want to keep that respirator or the mask on. Just to protect yourself. Now, when it comes to the more toxic pigments, I gave Amanda and Frida links to some good resources for you guys. Those, I would check with every single pigment on what you need to do to protect yourself. Some of them require a respirator, some of them require goggles. It depends. I would say bare minimum half face respirator that is rated for, oh, what was it? It's NIOSH. I think that's what it said. But check the links that I'm going to have them pop into the chats for you guys. That should have a good kind of base standard for you guys to check out and read up on. They're very good resources, so that way you guys know what to do for each pigment, because I really want you guys to be safe out there. I cannot stress that enough. We don't want to be breathing in pigments. It's not something you want to do. I'm also, as you can see, wearing gloves because I want to protect my hands and my skin. I also have my apron on because if it gets on my shirt, it could actually go through the fibers depending on what kind of a shirt I'm wearing. But it's a layer of protection. Also protects my clothes because I get paint on everything. I can't have nice things apparently. But I think that is all the materials for right now, and I can get started on mixing this into my oil. Do we have any quick questions before I start dumping some supplies out here?
Quick?
Questions. I know quick is an adjective that's probably not accurate, but you know.
Can linseed oil spoil over time?
Any oil can spoil over time. So if you open it and it has a funky smell, don't use it. That's the other thing. Oh, I almost forgot about this. I added a little extra. This is clove oil, 100% pure clove oil. If you are worried about any of the oil paints that you're mixing in kind of spoiling over time and like any accumulation of mold or mildew or anything like that, clove oil is a natural antibacterial, what is the term? Anti-mold. It'll anti-mold that. So this will keep your oils from mildewing. Antiseptic?
I don't know.
It's, you guys tell me what word am I looking for? What does clove oil do? Sorry. But this is actually great for any of the paints that you make, whether it be oils, watercolors, and when I say a little goes a long way, I mean a little goes a very long way. So for every batch of oil paint that you make, I would say 1 drop is all you really need. I probably won't be using it in this because I don't really need it. I would be using the paint that I make, and I'm not making a ton of paint either. So what I'm gonna actually be starting off with before I do scoop it out is I'm gonna have 2 teaspoons of the manganese violet and then 1 teaspoon of my linseed oil. Now I have 2 separate spoons because if I figure out that I've put too much oil to my pigment, I'm gonna need this to keep scooping more pigment in. And that way it keeps me from having to like wipe oil out of here and then having the pigment stick in and then it gets in the jar and it's a whole cross-contamination thing that you don't want. And I believe that's everything. So I'm gonna try and hopefully project my voice to where you guys can hear me with my mask on. But I'm gonna start scooping out the 2 teaspoons of the pigment and then 1 teaspoon of the oil, and I'm gonna start mixing it together with my my palette knife before I even get into anything else and before I do any of the grinding. I want to get that oil mixed in as much as possible. So, mask on. All right, make sure that when you do put on your mask, you get your nose nice and sealed. All right. So, you don't have to be super, precious with this, but you definitely want to get a good scoop. I tend to like to, can you guys hear me, by the way? We're good? Okay, cool. Yay! All right, so I like to use the side of my jar to kind of scoop it out a little bit. And then this set actually came with a leveler, which I very much love. So I usually end up having to push it into the top there and then just scraping off the excess as it comes out of the jar. And then just a quick tap and it's out of my measuring spoon. Now, I said 2 of these. Now the reason why I am measuring focus here. The reason why I'm measuring is because there is no such thing as a recipe for paint. Anybody who's looking for a recipe and taking notes, you can stop now because every single pigment is different. When I said that this pigment is a little bit more wet than like say this pigment, that's going to affect how much oil you're going to need, how much binder you're going to need. So every time you do this, whenever you're looking to start making your own oil paints, I would say do a small batch like this, figure out those ratios, and then kind of notate it on a piece of paper somewhere. That way you know how much paint, how much pigment to how much oil you need, and then you can use that as a reference later. Because I cannot tell you, like, the amount of pigment I know I need for this, or the amount of oil I know I need for this, is way different than other paints that I've made. So, All right, oil. Now this, hopefully I can not spill, but if I do spill, it's okay. So I said 1 teaspoon. Now this happens to be a ½ teaspoon measurement, so I'm gonna need 2 of these. All right, put that off to the side. Now, I'm gonna start just mixing it up. That's literally all I need to do. And you can see it's starting to just dissolve into that oil. Now, who there in the chats thinks that I did not put enough oil in here? I wanna know. Who thinks this is too much oil, just the right amount, or not enough? Sorry, I'm gonna try and like get this really incorporated. Now, the way that I'm mixing this is trying to push the oil into the pigment. You see how I'm not like fluffing this? It's keeping my dust to a minimum. I do not want to get that dispersed into the air. So the mixing, when you're getting this really incorporated into the oil at first, you don't want to go very fast. Now this is why I have 2 of the palette knives. All right, I think we're about mixed in. Except for this little tiny bit of paint that's down here. And I'm kind of chopping into it now because it's mostly mixed in, but I just want to make sure that there's no dry spots kind of anywhere else. So there you go. I can take my mask off now. Whew, that is sweaty. And 95's masks.
Honestly,
really
I think you were
sealed.
louder with the mask on.
Was I? All right, so who thinks this is perfect amount of oil? Who thinks it's not enough? And who thinks it's too much?
All we've got is, looks good to me, and maybe a little more oil.
This is too much oil. I know, it looks perfect, doesn't it? Now, some people are probably asking also, why would I need the grinding plate and why do I need to grind this if it's already, this is an oil paint. Now I'm going to take a little bit of this and I'm going to pop it off to the side because now I'm going to start grinding this to where you guys can see what it does. And I'm going to get these off to the side. So I'm going to take my muller and I'm going to just kind of start pushing this around, and I'm trying to get a very thin layer, and it's a weird feel thing. You try to not get a ton of it up on the edge of your muller here. So I try to like almost push it around first like this, and then I can start grinding it. And yes, this is going to take some muscle. Who needs a gym when you're an artist? Do you see how quickly that got super shiny? That's because when you start really grinding it into the plate and getting those the oil to completely encapsulate the pigments, the oil starts really taking over. And it starts almost like becoming super, super oily. Now, this is what we do to kind of clean this off. Collect our paint with the palette knife. Whoop. Do you see how like liquidy that is. That's too much oil. Isn't that crazy? It just like randomly becomes super, super oily. So you see the difference between this and this? That's why grinding it on this plate is so important. You can just mix it, absolutely, but it's not quite incorporated. Now the other thing that's going to happen with this paint up here that I have not ground in, that has a tendency to separate. So you ever have your tubes of oil paint and you open it up and you have a blob of oil just kind of come out? That's because it wasn't quite incorporated well. Sometimes that also will happen just because of the pigment, you know, the way that the pigment is. It's really hard to kind of get them to kind of, you know, completely be fully encapsulated with the oil. And the companies that make the paints, they have the machines that will, you know, do it in a matter of seconds, which is amazing. But this is why your oil paints, it takes a lot of effort to get to the stage. Now, when it comes to grinding this out, I probably would do this a minimum of twice before I actually say that it's done in any kind of capacity. Now, some pigments are going to require you to grind it more than that. Some of them are going to take a lot of elbow grease. Like this right here, this took a lot of effort for me to get it to be in a paint. It was just the pigment itself felt kind of almost sticky, I guess. So this one's really easy to grind, and it kind of flows really easily on the plate, but some pigments are just going to behave differently. So I wanted to see if I can actually, I haven't done this yet, but I wanted to see if I could find out if there's a difference between first grind and second grind in how it appears. So then I'm going to definitely grind it all together and then fix the ratios. Oh, and these right here, these tools right here. So the color spatchers that we have here, these I love. They're a lot softer than the other ones. They're very, very soft. It's a silicone kind of rubber nib. These I love for removing the paint off of my glass muller. It works so well. But when it comes to the grinding plate, the softer it is, it doesn't quite pick it up super well. So that's why I love the ones that are extra firm. I also really love this curved one for this. Hopefully I can't even show you that because it's black on dark purple. Hopefully you can see it here. See that curve there, and it has a sharp edge? Hopefully you can. That's what I really love to use to like scrape the paint so that it's not stuck into the glass and you can really collect all of the paint. Now, if you are like me and you're developing arthritis, because yay, 30s, this might not be super great on your hand. So that's why I included this right here. This is a lot more ergonomic, and it's definitely still stiff, and it's good enough to remove a lot of the paint that you have on the plate here, because you definitely want to kind of move it around and get it picked up. That way you can really grind all of the different pigments into the oil. So, questions, because I'm sure we have them.
First off, what is there like a price benefit here versus just buying? Or would this be more if you wanted your own custom specific color?
Well, here's the thing. When you are getting a paint that's made by a manufacturer, you are paying for consistency. So the paint that you buy is going to be the same every single time. It's going to be ground. They have their formulas and everything already worked out. They've already done all the measurements from pigment to oil. They've already figured out how many times they have to grind it. They've already done all of that. And you don't have to do the physical work. So when you do all of this, it is like kind of almost like a science experiment. And you are physically going to have to, like, you know, do some effort to get it to actually be an oil paint. But you aren't paying for that labor. So yes, there is going to be a price difference. Granted, you do have to also keep in mind cadmiums and cobalts and those really expensive pigments are still going to be really, really expensive because the price doesn't come from the oil, it comes from the pigments. So those pigments are what makes it pricey. But that's a great question. It's like doing your own oil change versus going to get somebody else to do it. All right. I also wanted to show you guys how to fix whenever you have too much oil. But I just wanted to see, because I'm curious. This is why I usually also put these over here, because they jiggle. To see if there's a visual difference between the second grind and the first. So you can do circles like this, you can do figure eights, up and down, just as long as you're changing that direction and kind of getting that pigment moving around on the plate. That's really what you're looking for. And if you have any paint that's kind of collected up here, get that off of there because it's not getting ground in. And while I'm thinking about it, if you guys are interested in seeing this process with watercolor paints, Mott is going to be having that class in 2 weeks. So you're going to actually be able to watch Mott create watercolors in a very similar manner. But watercolors are a little bit different because there's, I feel like, a lot more mix-ins that you can do. Now, let's get this scraped in. I also love how big this is. I will say these do come in a larger size. I think there's like a 3-inch. So if you didn't want to have to like scrape little lines, there's a larger size out there. All right. Now, technically speaking, I did say this is too much oil, right? But if you like your oil paints to be this consistency, that could absolutely be something that you do. If you don't like that your oil paints come out of the tube and they're stiff and they're, you know, harder to kind of work with and you have to kind of break it down with linseed oil, this would be something where you could actually add more oil in and this could be the consistency of your paint. You know, there's nothing wrong with this. For me, this is, my problem is that like, that's too fluid for me. Now it's going to be very pigmented, so just keep that in mind. It is still very fluid, but it's going to be a lot of pigment. Now if you actually wanted to see that, well, I don't really have a brush because I forgot that. Can you guys give me a brush real quick? Because I wanted to swatch it real fast. Just an oil brush, so like maybe the like the Pro Stroke white bristle would be great. Because these are the other ones that I had made on my splotch book, my color diary. Love this thing. So these are the ones that I had done before. I think it's right there. So if you wanted to like swatch your paints right now and see kind of, let me get a smaller one. Thank you. That's perfect. All right. So if at any time you're like, I don't know how I feel about this, swatch your paint. It's nothing wrong with that. So I'm going to start down here. There we go. So I know there's a bit of a glare because it's got that glossiness with the oil. So let me hold it at an angle. But you can see how pigmented it is. But you can see that it has a transparency to it because it does have a higher quality or a higher quantity of oil to pigment ratio. So the more oil that you add to your paints, the more transparent it's going to be. So for me personally, this is a little thin. That's why I'm saying for me, it's too much oil. Now to fix this, now actually before I say that, or before I do this, I do want to incorporate, yeah, I was going to say the difference between the first grind and the second grind, I think it's not the glossiness, I think it's just the consistency. Like this isn't as fluid as this is, but I have the whole thing of paint over here, so I'm going to actually grind this one down too before I forget and before I fix it. So how much paint do you guys think or how much pigment do you think we need to add to this to make it to a better consistency? Do we have any guesses? That's what I want to know while I'm grinding this all together. All right, so I think technically that little blob that I had in there that I had pulled off for the first, before I even ground it all down, technically that has only been ground down once, but it's incorporated enough. I think it'll be all right, especially because we're going to be grinding this down again. But I wanted to show you guys how to fix these. All right. How are we doing? How much do you guys think we need to add?
We have a quarter of a teaspoon. And also a no clue, as in, we don't really trust you anymore.
You don't listen. Okay, I did kind of pull, I did pull a little bit of what is the phrase?
A fast one?
A fast one. I was going to say a stick and move, but I was like, that's not right. Phrases. We have a question?
Just a quick reminder, this is just pigment and linseed oil, right? No other additives?
Yes, this is only pigment, the Gamblin Manganese Violet, and the Chelsea Classical, I don't know the caps on very well, I don't want to tip it over too much, the Chelsea Classical Studio Linseed Oil. So this is an oil paint. That's all you have to have in order to make an oil paint. Now, granted, if you end up adding in more of the pigment, it's going to bring that fluidity down, which is what I'm about to do, but you can only bring it down so much and before it starts getting into almost like a paste kind of consistency. So if you wanted to have a body but not a pasty kind of feel, that's where you can add in more of the other additives. Now, I'm not going to do that on the show today. I just wanted to just let you know that that's out there. The other additives that are available are like beeswax. Beeswax is a great way to add like an impasto kind of feel. And that's where you are going to, they have available beeswax pellets. I think the Williamsburg brand has the smaller ones that melt faster, which are lovely. But you do have to melt them in order to incorporate it. So, you know, beeswax pellets aren't something that you want to grind down into your plate, melt it, then incorporate it, then you can grind it and be able to kind of combine them together. But, I mean, all the different additives, you can even do like an impasto medium if you wanted to incorporate that into your paints. Because once I'm done with this here, I'm going to also show you how to store it. So don't worry, we're going to get to that too. But once it's stored, it's going to be airtight, so you're not going to have it cure in the tube. So it's not going to be any kind of a problem. And you can have an impasto medium that's already mixed into your oil paints. This is why I'm saying it's a lot of effort to get to this, but if this is the kind of paint that you want to paint with, and it's going to be ready immediately after out of the tube, and you don't have to do any kind of like prep work in order to start painting, this is a process that's going to be really beneficial to you as an artist. It's just like meal prep. You have to do it all before you can actually enjoy the meals, kind of thing. Just a lot of effort. So before I open this, I'm going to put my mask on. Hopefully I don't have any paint on that. I don't think I do. I'm usually pretty clean when I grind paints. Except for that orange. That orange got everywhere. And the little things for my ears are really tight. So, ooh, okay. All right, so I'm going to tap it down to where it's all settled at the bottom before I even pull the cap off. And do the same thing. Keep the dust to a minimum. So I'm going to just double it. And you know what? I could do the leveled thing, but we're just gonna. Hold on. There it is. here. Now again, before I take my mask off, I'm going to incorporate this entirely into the oil. Now, see how there's a huge difference in color? That's an indicator to me personally of whether or not it's been incorporated. All right. So, as you can see, in the baking world, this is like what it looks like when you start adding butter to sugar. And it's getting that like kind of weird, like almost like gritty consistency. This, and I did this on purpose, I swear, this is too little oil. This is what it looks like when it's too little oil. So it's not actually incorporating completely. You're still working with that powder. Because I wanted to show you guys what it looks like when it has too much and when it has too little. That way you know what it looks like. Now, if you really want to double check, you can take the grinder see how it's still not getting shiny and oily? No matter how much I do that, that's too little oil. Because I wanted to show you the difference, right? So now, this is where I take my pipette. Because if you're anything like me, and you're trying to figure out these ratios, you're going to go back and forth between too much oil and too little. So if you take a pipette and just squeeze out a little bit here and there.
It's like me and buttercream.
Yeah. It's exactly almost like baking, is that you just have to find that kind of almost sweet spot. And it is going to take patience. That's why I'm saying when you first start out with a pigment that you are unfamiliar with and you don't know those ratios, make a small batch. That way you can kind of work with it a little bit and then not be struggle bus. And if you ever get to the point where you're just like, I am done, and you just want to stop for the day, you can absolutely box this up in the way that I'm going to show you at the end here. And then you can get back to it another day. It's not going to dry or anything, so it's not going to be a problem. Now, this right here looks about like that, the first batch that I did, right? So we know that's too much oil. I'm looking for that in between where it's kind of like, it's hard to describe, I guess, like a gritty paste mixture. Like thicker than toothpaste is what I'm looking for. And this has definitely got the pigment all over it. So, for me, because I've done this before, I'm thinking kind of this right here is what I'm looking for. I hope you guys can see that because it's a little dark. But it's kind of like, it looks dry, if that's the best way I can describe it. Now, I have all of this that I have to still incorporate. There's a blob of oil right there, so I can start doing that. And this is how I kind of fix it coming back from too little oil, is where I use the pipette and I start in a corner. And I kind of start working that corner further and further into my pigments. And if I find a good consistency, I keep it there. And then I keep adding oil to the dry area. All right, so this is almost there. again. I want that paste-like consistency. If I weren't talking, I feel like this would be a very ASMR video. Alright, so where'd my pipe bag go? Hopefully I didn't just drop it in there. I usually know better. Nope, it's up here. Okay. Just a couple drops here and there. Because I like what that is doing. So I'm going to leave that be. And I'm going to try and fix this up here. And while I'm going back and forth with this, if you guys do have any questions, let me know. Because I'm just going to be trying to get this back to where it needs to be.
Could you do this process with pigment you created yourself?
Absolutely.
With like rose petals, per se?
You can. Now, the one thing to note is that if you're not using a pigment that is an artist grade pigment, I could not tell you what the light fastness is going to be. That's why I would suggest using an artist grade pigment, because I can tell you this right here has a very high light fast rating, and each pigment is going to tell you what the light fast rating is, because the light fastness comes from specifically the pigment, and I don't think it's written on this jar, but it should be on our website as well, so that should be available. So you absolutely could make paint from roses, but the issue being is that over time that paint is going to fade. What it fades to is probably going to be like a weird brown, because most organic things tend to go brown. Alright, so this is a little bit fluid, so if I keep, that's why I'm starting with like a small amount here, adding a little bit of oil and kind of working my way into that dry area, because it still has a little bit too much oil in there. But I think this, with a little bit more, it's perfect. Then I can add that to this pile over here.
Could you use scrapings from soft pastels to make oil paint?
I was wondering if somebody's going to ask me that. So here's the thing. Yes, you absolutely could make a pastel from soft pastels, the dry ones that are like chalk. The only thing to remember is that dry pastels are not just pigment. It's pigment with a binder. That's why it's a soft pastel. The binder in soft pastels tends to be a clay. So now you're making an oil paint with pigment and clay. So it's going to have a different kind of consistency than this does. But yes, absolutely you could.
And I know we're going to do watercolor in a couple weeks, but could you use the same pigments that you're using here to make watercolors?
100% yes, absolutely. In fact, I think Mott and I were kind of sharing some pigments, which is really, really fun. So if you wanted to have an oil paint color in this manganese violet and you wanted to have a watercolor in the same color, you can absolutely do that. Now, if you are going to be incorporating like the clove oil, this is the time you do it, when you're kind of mixing it into the pigment with the oil. You don't want to do it after you figured out the oil to pigment ratio, because that oil that you're adding is going to throw it off again. So
one of the YouTubers mentioned that this process looks like it doesn't have a high yield. What's the largest batch you could make at a time?
That it doesn't have a high yield, mostly because I'm not doing a large quantity. But say if I tried to make this whole jar, I mean, it wouldn't make a ton, but how much oil paint do you use when you're painting is my question. Because like the amount that I'm making here would last me a very long time. But that's also because I'm used to understanding how much paint I need to put out on my palette in order for me to do the painting that I'm looking to do. And I'm really good about keeping my waste to a minimum. But if you like to do impasto painting, you know, I would suggest using an impasto medium that takes your paint and kind of extends it and gives you that thickness that you're looking for without burning through your paints. Because let's be honest, paints are probably the most expensive thing that artists use, you know. We don't want to burn through them unnecessarily. All right, now this, sorry, last little bit that I'm doing here, I definitely added too much oil, but I think with the dryness that I have over here, it's going to be okay. Because once I start mixing all of it in, it should be that paste-like consistency. All right, so I hope you guys can see that. They see that texture? Hopefully. Yeah, right there. That's what I'm looking for. I want it to look dry. All right, now make sure I got all the last little bits of the pigment incorporated in. I found some over here. Before I take my mask off, before I keep going. Yep, I got paint on me. But I think this pinky finger is okay. There we go. Whew. This N95 really, they really are quite warm, but they're worth it. All right, so now that my pigment is, again, incorporated, this is where I start grinding it down to see exactly the consistency that I'm about to get. Now this, because I like my paint to be a little bit thicker, this one requires a little bit more muscle. And I'm just trying to get it kind of spread out on the plate first. Now, when it comes to thicker paints, I tend to get this. Oh, hold on. Make sure that's on camera. See how there's a buildup of pigment on there? I want to get that off because if I don't, that's not actually getting ground in and it's not getting incorporated. So I need to make sure to keep an eye on that. That's why I love this thing. It just scrapes all the paint off so easily. Make sure I get all of this off just so I can make sure it's also incorporated really, really well. All right. Now when I'm smearing this around, I have the one side that I'm pushing it away, like if I'm going this direction, this side I have up. I'm gonna do it kind of more of like an exaggerated thing. That way I'm pushing it around with the back side of the muller. This is not grinding it, I'm just merely spreading it out on my plate. Because once I get to about this level and it's kind of spread out, that's when I actually go in with the small circles and start getting it kind of ground in and incorporated. Now before I do that, I am gonna close my oil before I hit that and it ends up everywhere. All right, so this is the part where it takes the muscle.
While you're doing that, can you talk about how you would clean up all
Oh,
this?
that is definitely part of this. I'm gonna show you guys. Do not let me end this show without showing you how to clean up. Because that is, again, a really big, important part of this because when it comes to that, there are certain things that some people do that can put some of this pigment into our drinking water, and I want to make sure we avoid that as well. So, gotta be safe with that as well. All right. Now, I'm going to take my little wedge, kind of see where I'm at. And of course, you need to go over here. Now, up here, I do have some oil from just the pipette getting a little leaky from it laying on the side. I have to make sure I avoid that. Otherwise, that oil is going to get incorporated and it's going to throw my whole ratio off. That's why I always forget, but I try to make sure to not leave things on my plate. But I do it anyway. Because I'm like, oh, that's a good spot for it to just leak everywhere. But, you know, it's okay. So here's the other one. How well it scrapes it. It's just so satisfying. But, there we go. This one's just a little bit bigger. Probably should get the bigger one of those too. We just didn't happen to have it in the studio. All right, so there is the ratio of paints. Now again, remember, if I had paid attention and measured how much of that pipette oil that I added to this, I could tell you exactly what this is. But like, this is a little bit thicker. I still wouldn't, like, this is still a little bit thin for my consistency that I personally like. This is a great consistency to have as far as a paint. Now, you want to see if we can tell the difference on swatching. Without breaking it down. Trying to do just a thin layer. There you go. See how much darker it is now that I've added a lot more pigment? It's gonna have less transparency. But I like this consistency, and I think out of the tube I would be able to use this quite easily, and it would be pretty satisfying to paint with. I wouldn't have to break it down with oil or anything. So I am going to, especially because it's 622, get this boxed up, and I'm going to show you guys a couple options. Now, if you're like me and you like your paint a little bit thicker, there is this option, which is a double take palette cup. I actually put my really thick paint in here. This is really so much easier to get really thick paint scooped into this, but with the thinner stuff, you can absolutely put it into these little tubes, and then you can just Sharpie the name of whatever it is in there. But with the thicker paint, it's actually quite difficult to get it into these tubes. That's why I think this is a great option. So the tubes, though, pull these off over here. They come in boxes of 48. We have a lot of different options. I just happen to have the 45 milliliter and the, oh gosh, what was this, 22 milliliter. So I'm going to show you the difference in size there. So this is the 22 milliliter, and this is the 45. So if, depending on how much paint you make, get the appropriate size tube. And if you actually look at it, this has the cap, and then you just have the empty backside where it's ready to be filled. Now, the cool thing is, I probably shouldn't show this because it's a little bit of a tryptophobia warning. Okay, tryptophobia warning with the holes, I'm sorry. This is how they come, which is quite lovely because it actually doesn't mess up the tubes and shipping. It's quite, Katie, I'm sorry. But it's so sturdy, and the tubes, they're all perfectly ready to be used, because I mean, this is aluminum. If I wanted to, and I'm sorry, this is a little bit wasteful, but like, you see how easily it's destroyed. You want a good shipping box. So let me just grab another one of those. I'm sorry. Sorry, Frida. We don't like waste around here. I just wanted to show you how easily they are, like, it's like an aluminum tube. So to get this kind of in a tube, all I'm going to do is, I actually have the two different shapes of palette knives. I want the one that's like longer and skinnier. It's a little bit easier for me to scoop and get it in there. If you do that, that's okay. It's not the end of the world. I'm usually a lot cleaner with this. And you guys want to know a weird quirk about me? Whenever I'm scooping things and like smearing it in like icing or paint, I do this weird thing with my mouth where I'm like, and I don't know why. I try to be very conscious about it, but I just did it, and I know I'm gonna be watching this back and be like, oh. So, is it just me? Does anybody else do that?
I do that with putting on mascara.
Jeez.
I can't even help it. I know that my mouth does not help.
Yep. Sometimes. All right, now I'm gonna get a little bit in there. Hear that sound change a little bit? That's the paint going down into the kind of nozzle. And then I can continue to scoop. I'm trying not to do that with my mouth. I'm sorry if I do. It's just, yeah. You had to make it big screen. Ah. Yep, thank you, Katie. Normally I am way cleaner with this, but I just did it again. Somebody out there, please tell me you do that too. Somebody in the comments has to. You can hear that, yeah, the sound goes up when it gets closer to the front of it. All right. I'm trying not to.
It's my new favorite game.
I know. It's a weird quirk that I don't know why I do it, but I've always have done that. Which honestly, I will take that over what my dad does. Anytime he's very, very seriously concentrating, he does this like, his tongue just sticks out. Which, I'm sorry, Dad, if you're watching, I just outed you. All right, so I did this very messily. These are my favorite. Now, at this point in time, normally I will scrape every last little bit that I can and get this into my tube. And I also usually do it a lot neater than this. But if you do get a messy end of your tube, a little Soho wipe is amazing. And you can just kind of clean it off. Try not to get any of the cleaner into it. You definitely don't want to do that. But I think the majority of the paint is not on my hands. We're good-ish. Yep. All right, so how to close this. Now I can actually see if I look in there where the level is. It's not a ton, but for example, say if it was right here, I could squeeze out the majority of the air and make it as close to that as possible. Ooh, there's definitely paint right there. Every time I squeeze it, the paint that's right here is trying to go up. It's just gonna happen. So that's why I try not to be super messy with it. And I tried to also take the longer palette knife and scrape that edge and wipe it off before I pull it out of there. But I don't want to run out of time here. So as I squeeze this, it's going to have paint come out the top of it. That is something you do want to avoid. But considering I'm trying to time crunch here, I'm just going to take another Soho wipe, kind of get it off my hands. So when it comes to crimping a tube, I'm going to use a tool that is not for crimping tubes. It's canvas pliers. I actually really love these canvas pliers. Now, once I use this for this process, I do not use it for canvas because I'm most likely going to get pigment here. And it's about to happen because this is definitely having purple pigment come out of the top. So this is no longer for canvas. This is for my paint tubes. So I will crimp, actually you want to go over the overhead, I'll show you how far I kind of crimp down. All right, so I'm going to crimp probably about maybe an eighth of an inch down, quarter of an inch, somewhere in there, measurements. And then before I actually let it go, I'm going to kind of bend it a bit, right? Just so I get a little bit of a crimp. Then I'm going to squeeze that over, crimp it down again, same amount, bend it. This is why I said you're going to get some pigment on your tube. Take a little Soho wipe, wipe that right off. Because now that, take the crimper again, squeeze it down. It's nice and crimped. My paint's not going to come out of there. Now, if you want to go the extra step and kind of get everything pushed up as far as you can, I do recommend a big squeeze. I love these because that, if I crimp it at the end, kind of crank it through, pushes my paint as far towards the end as I possibly could. Now, if you know you have an air bubble in there, you could burp it by opening this up, tapping it on the back, because you can also very easily fold that little extra down, tap it that way, get the air bubble towards the top of the nozzle, squeeze that air out, and then kind of get your paint back up to the nozzle. It's just you have to kind of practice at that. It's just a weird thing that you're gonna have to get used to when you do tube your own paint. I'm not great at it, but that's okay. So clean up. Now normally I would make sure that I got every last little bit of paint off of there, but I will say Soho wipes are the world's best thing in the world. They're also biodegradable, in case anybody's like, oh my gosh, the waste. They're way better than paper towels in my opinion, because it also has the cleaner. So this right here is part of what you're gonna have to do. This is why I want to try and get I use the scraper and I get all of that pigment off of there. I know, I'm sorry, I'm racing against the clock and this is a bit of a waste and I hate that, but it's for educational purposes. All right, so Soho wipe will get this pretty clean, right? You can go back and forth between paper towels or an easy wiper and kind of wipe off as much of this as you can. Normally I use one easy wiper, or the Soho wipes, to get like all of it kind of moving and kind of around like this, and then it takes maybe a couple more to get it really cleaned off of there, kind of like this, and I'll hold on. Right? These things are wonderful. Now this is still not clean. It's still gonna have pigments on it. Best way I can show you that is actually use an easy wiper. Oh, here's a dirty easy wiper. Well, let me use a clean one so you can really see. It has a little bit too much paint on it. All right, so if I take a clean easy wiper, right? This looks relatively clean over here, right? It's still gonna have purple on it. So that still has pigment on it. And that pigment, once the cleaner of this dries, that pigment's gonna be on your plate. And next time you go to make paint, that pigment is now going to be incorporated into whatever paint you use. So if I use this orange, it's going to be purple plus orange, which makes mud. And for anybody out there making paints and changing over the color, that is your worst nightmare, is where you take your beautiful pigments and make them into mud unintentionally. So to save the heartache for everybody out there, the best thing to do is to wash it with soap and water. Now, I do not mean wash it in your sink with soap and water, because you do not want the water to drain into our drinking system and get that pigment into our drinking system. That's the part where I was talking about earlier. You do not want to do that. So I get it to about this level of clean down here, and then I take a bucket with soap and I wash it with water. You don't need a whole lot, honestly. But it's a bucket of water that has soap in it that you can honestly reuse. You know, it's not a big deal. And then once you get the pigments off of the plate, you can then very easily just spray it off with a hose or rinse it off. And it would be nice and clean and ready for your next color. Now, pigments like this are, I'm sorry, it's kind of the devil. Because this pigment, not only did I wipe it off with a Soho wipe, I washed it. And then when I brought it back over here, it was still orange. So pigments like this just are so concentrated and like they stick. And so that I had to wipe it off again and do the process twice in order for it to get clean enough to where I'm not getting contamination into my next color. But when it comes to the water that you use to wash this off, at that point in time you have two options. There is a cleaning system that Golden makes. I believe it's called Crash. I can't remember. I believe it's Crash. But it is an additive that you put into your water that makes all of the pigment solidify and go to the bottom, and it separates the water from your paints. And it's a very good way to get the water away from the pigments and kind of separate it that way. The other option you have, if you don't want to have to buy an additive to get them to separate, and then then you have to dump the sludge, because once it does separate, you do have to still get rid of that sludge, and that would be the same process of if you just want to take your dirty water to the dump, which we had an episode on going to the dump. It's super easy. You can even call them ahead of time and make sure that they will take this and say, hey, this is paint water. They should be able to take it, or they should guide you on how to dispose of that properly. But your local ordinance, whether you're under the county, the city, whatever it may be, they should be able to tell you where your closest dump is and what they can take and what are the steps you're going to need to do in order to properly dispose of paint water. Do we have a question?
I was just saying there's a video. We have a video.
Yeah, we had a video on recycling your solvents for oil paints, and I took the paint sludge from that and your old solvents and brought it to the dump so you guys can see our local dump here in Raleigh. But it's a super easy process. Usually all you have to do is drive in and go, hey, I have this, and they'll just be like, all right, and they'll just take it. But if you do want to call ahead, just especially if it's like a longer drive for you, call ahead and make sure that you do all of the steps to properly get everything ready to be disposed of. Because like they might have to say, put it in a jar that's got a label on it or something with Sharpie, you know, just something like that. That way you're properly set and ready to go. All you have to do is drive up and hand it off. It's nice and easy. Do we have any questions? I'm sure. Any last minute questions? I know we're running a little late, but I will be kind of wiping this down while you guys do that. But I hope you guys enjoyed this. It is a labor of love, but it's just really, really amazing to be able to see how easy it is to make paint and control your paints as an artist and be able to get exactly what you want every time and not have to take a pre-made paint and work it to be perfect for you. This is something where, you know, if you have a very specific process, this is going to be beneficial and get you to that painting stage so much faster. Especially when you're just like, okay, I'm ready to paint, and then you don't have to do 10 steps just to be able to put paint to canvas kind of a thing. There's purple everywhere. All right, so I'm going to take my gloves off because I think that's officially the show. Did we have any last minute questions? I think we're good. Awesome.
Having that, how to dispose of your used solvent and oil paint in there for
Oh,
everybody.
nice. They're going to put the link to that episode that I was just talking about. They're going to put that in the chats for you guys. Of course, if you are watching this in the future and you guys have any questions, feel free to pop your questions in the chat. We always make sure to check them and, you know, keep tabs on them and answer what you got going on. We have one last question.
Real quick last question. How do you choose the Muller size?
Oh, so there's a large and a small. Oh, I don't have the small Muller. Essentially, this is the largest plate we have. We have a smaller plate, and this is the largest Muller that we have. And we have a smaller Muller. This one, in my opinion, goes with this plate. And the smaller Muller, I think it's actually over on the shelf over there. Yeah, the
other.
Yeah. So I think they're going to go grab it real quick so we can show you. But this is, what is it, 17 3/4 by 17 3/4? I believe that's the size of this plate. But this, as you can see, like with my hand, like it's not huge. It's still very, it fits in your hand well. And this, it's the tiny one. It's so cute. So here's the size difference. Right? So if you're using the smaller plate, I would say grab the smaller Muller. Like, it still fits in your hand really well. You don't need the gigantic Muller in order to grind it on a smaller plate. I just think that this kind of really goes hand in hand with a smaller plate, and this one goes with the big one. But if you want the big one and the smaller plate, I'm not going to say you can't because, you know, we're artists and we break all the rules. But that was making oil paint. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Of course, make sure you join us next week. I will not be here, but Matt will be, and Matt is going to be teaching creating landscape compositions, which I'm very, very excited about. So not only doing, landscape painting, but how to work the composition to where it's very satisfying and looks amazing. So I will see you guys next time. Thank you so much. Bye.